Greetings, loves. It is I, Tactical Girlfriend. Welcome back to the channel. I hope everybody's doing well. A lot of us are running rifles, especially with optics, and while mounting things like red dots and holographic sights are pretty simple and basic to get on the gun, things like scopes in particular are a little bit more of a process to do so. So I figured I'd make a video about it. I was mounting a scope to this rifle here, and I documented the process for you. Hopefully this is a useful tutorial for y'all. Even if you are experienced, maybe you'll learn something new. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Now, before we get into the process here, let's talk about what we need. There are just a few items on the list. First of all, obviously, you need a rifle, you need a scope, but you also need a scope mount. Obviously, the scope needs to attach to the rifle somehow, and scope mounts do come in a lot of different sizes and shapes. In fact, it might be a little bit overwhelming, so just be sure that you're getting the right thing for the right specs for your scope and for your rifle. Especially for folks who are mounting things onto AR-style platforms, you're going to notice that there are cantilever mounts out there that tend to lend themselves really well to that platform, and I generally will recommend those if you are using a scope of higher magnification on an AR-style rifle. You will also need a torque driver, blue Loctite, a precision level, and note, just be sure that you're getting the most precise level that you can out there. There's various kinds of levels out there. Usually there are specifications for how precise you can get. The more precise, the better here. Just shop around and be sure you know what you're doing. Also, you'll need a cord and a weight to hang that cord from, as well as a way to hang that cord and weight from something else. That is going to be for your plumb line. I will get into that later. Next, we're going to pre-mount the scope onto the rifle. Now, when I say pre-mount, I mean basically put your scope in your scope rings or your scope mount and put those on the rifle. Don't tighten it down all the way. You want to be able to move the scope around inside the rings and the mount, and you also want to position that mount on different positions on the Picatinny rail, and you're going to just experiment with where the eye box sits relative to you, the shooter, in a shooting position that you would generally use, and see how it feels. Now, in an AR-style platform, I'll generally recommend that you get the mount as far forward on the rail of your upper. That is to say that you don't have any contact points with the handguard rail, because that's a separate position and it will not maintain zero as well. So be sure that you are putting the mounting surface only on the surface of rail of your upper. Then you're going to simply slide that scope back and forth, and you're going to look through it and just try to suss out where the eye box sweet spot is for you. Basically, the least amount of shadow that appears pretty naturally when you get into your shooting position. Once you achieve that, you're pretty good to go. But also, you want to experiment with this with not only the scope, but also with the mount itself. If you need to move the mount back further, that's totally fine. If you need to move the scope back further too, that's totally fine. But I generally will recommend with more magnified scopes that you mount everything as far forward as possible if you are using an AR-style platform. Next, you're going to want to make some reference marks here so that you can save your position of both your scope inside the mount as well as the mount on the Picatinny. So take a careful note of that. You can use a pencil, you can use tape, just mark it off where it seems useful for you to know where the scope sits inside the mount, as well as where the mount sits on the rifle. Once you have all that squared away, you can take the scope out of the mount, simply take the mount itself, get the screws out of the mount, and apply some blue Loctite to it. A little bit goes a long way here, but you can honestly get pretty goopy, as I like to do. I just wipe up the excess. It doesn't really hurt. After that, you're then going to reference the torque specs for your scope mount. You're going to set your torque driver to them, and then you're going to put those screws back in the scope mount, get it on those rails, and then start to tighten it down. Now, as you tighten it down, apply forward pressure on the scope mount against the forward sections of the Picatinny in front of it, towards the muzzle. The reason that we do this is to reduce the chances of anything shaking loose under recoil and then thereby causing you to lose zero. Then once you got everything torqued to spec, you're then going to place your scope back into your scope mount. Again, you want to reference whatever marks that you made so that you position it in the same way that you wanted to the first time, and you probably are also going to want to double check. Start to close those rings so that they're a little bit snug, but don't make it too snug that you can't move the scope. Again, use some trial and error here, look through your scope, see what's comfortable for you, and make sure that that eye box is optimized for you and your eyes. Next, we're going to start to level everything out, and the first thing we need to do is achieve a longitudinal level. This is not absolutely necessary, but I find that it does help with some precise, fine adjustments to just have this thing set level properly in both axes, both X and Y. So we're first going to start with a longitudinal level. Put your rifle on a surface, get some shims, it could be books, it could be anything that rests below the rifle, and you're just going to try to get a balancing act here by putting your level on your scope turret longitudinally in line with the barrel so that you can level it out. Achieve that level first, nice and center. Once we have a longitudinal level set, we're then going to do a lateral level, and that's exactly what it sounds like. You're going to turn that level 90 degrees, and you're going to place it on the same section of Picatinny on your upper as your scope mount. Then you're going to rotate that rifle clockwise and counterclockwise in its rest until it's nice and leveled out. You're then going to repeat the same part of the process by moving that level to the top of the scope turrets once again, and then you're going to rotate that scope inside its rings counterclockwise and clockwise until it's nice and level as well. Then you can begin to tighten things down. Now once you have everything torqued down to spec, you probably should be good to go, but I do like to confirm this, and in order to do so, I need to set up a plumb line. This is where that cord and that weight will come in handy. If you can get a real plumb line, that's all the better, but honestly, I find that just using some cordage and a water bottle like a Nalgene is good enough for me. I simply took that cordage, hung that water bottle from it with a little bit of water in it, and then I hung it from a stand as far away as I possibly could get. I then lay down with my rifle as far away from that plumb line as possible, and I then obtain another lateral level, just the same way we did before, by placing the level on top of the Picatinny. Laterally, of course, and make sure that it's perfectly level. Then I look through the scope, I line up that plumb line with the stadia line inside my scope, vertically of course, and make sure that those are both perfectly in line with each other. If they are, you should be good to go. If they aren't, you might want to check your work and go back a few steps. Once everything is looking fine and dandy, it's time to hit the range and start zeroing. Simply be sure that you're using the appropriate ammo that you want to be using with your rifle to set your zero. Set a target up. I like to generally start out at 25 yards just to get some rounds on paper and walk things in. Once you got some good shots that are probably a little bit below where you're actually trying to aim, that's perfectly fine and normal. You're then going to move the target out to the distance you want to zero at. Obviously, if you are using a bullet drop compensation reticle, be sure that you're using the appropriate distance for that zero. Reference your manual if you have to, or if you're using something that is a little bit more generic and less defined, such as something in milrads, you're going to want to just set that zero to what you think is best for you. Go find some ballistic calculator online if you need to, but then simply get some tight groups. Now when you're making your adjustments, I generally like to do 3 to 5 shots between each adjustment. Obviously, learn how to use your MOA measurements at the appropriate ranges and make those adjustments as necessary, measuring out just how far off center you are, and then making whatever clicks that you need to, both in your windage and elevation on your scope. Speaking of which, it's also really important to know how much MOA or mils each click of adjustment is on your scope, both elevation and windage, and appropriately factor those into your calculations as you are making adjustments after every string of shots. Be conservative here, take your time, be very methodical, and be sure you're getting really good groups. After a while, you should be all nice and zeroed in with a nice good group center on target. You're done. That's it. You have a zeroed scope. Well, I hope this is useful to y'all. I know this wasn't a very exciting video or anything, but I've gotten the question about this a lot, and I figured I should definitely make a video about it at some point. So, if you also have your own questions that are in further depth about this, I'm happy to weigh in where I can. Feel free to give a shout in the comments below and I'll see what I can do for you. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell too. Also, I just want to give a huge shout out to viewers like you. You keep this channel going. I really find a lot of enjoyment just simply helping folks out there on the internet and being a resource, but it is not cheap. I need to buy equipment, I need to try things out, I need to drive to ranges, I need to spend a bunch of money on ammo too, and camera equipment, and things break. Anyway, you know the drill. If you want to help me out though, you can just simply go to patreon.com/tacticalgf. The biggest contributors are named at the end of the video. And that's all the scoping out I've got for you today. I really appreciate you all tuning in. Please be good to each other out there, and as always, please take care. Bye!